So here we are. We're actually currently sitting in a hotel lobby, the hotel where I'm staying here in San Francisco, and you can, of course, hear the noise of a noisy hotel lobby all around us. They're currently serving free glasses of wine, which is something I think they do every afternoon at 5:30. So we're right in the middle of wine time here at the hotel. So that's why you can hear lots of noise. But that just kind of gives you you can probably hear lots of American English being spoken around us. So it's true. I actually am in America. And as you know, listeners, I'm currently in San Francisco on my honeymoon, and my wife and I have been having an amazing time. And it's so much fun, obviously, to see the country, but also to be surrounded by American English, which I find fascinating. And I've been hoping to speak to some locals on the podcast. And who better to talk to than Mr. A.J. Hoge himself? Because not only is he a native of the San Francisco Bay Area, I think, is that right?
Originally from Georgia, actually, but a transplant to San Francisco.
Okay, all right. Well, he's certainly a resident of San Francisco, but he's also probably definitely the most famous online English teacher. Yes, that's right, even more famous than Luke from Luke's English podcast. Now, not that it's all about being famous or anything, no. In fact, AJ has successfully made the move from being a teacher in classrooms in the traditional sense to being an international English teaching entrepreneur who helps many people around the world to improve their English using his self-made Effortless English program, which I'm sure that you've heard of. As I'm here, I thought it would be a great idea to chat to AJ to find out about him, his work, his insights into the best ways to learn English, and also his city and anything else that comes up in our conversation. And yes, you can join us, listeners, here on the podcast. I should actually say thank you to Antonio, one of the listeners. I think we both share Antonio as an audience member for our podcast and so on. So I think we should say thank you to Antonio for sort of suggesting that we get together to have this chat. We've got one microphone here, which means that only one of us can speak at a time. So hopefully we will be able to manage that okay. So how are you, AJ? How are you doing?
Doing very well. We've got a beautiful day in San Francisco today. Sunny, very warm for San Francisco. Been out walking. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Is this normal weather for this time of year here?
Not really. Actually, traditionally, the summers are quite foggy and chilly and windy. But the last few years, it's changed, and we've been getting these warm, sunny summers.
Right. Foggy and windy and chilly. Sounds like London.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that's the traditional, normal San Francisco weather.
Oh, okay. So that's where the recording cut out. That's how annoying it was. But don't worry, I managed to restart. So I'm now going to play you part two. So we spoke for another 20 minutes or so, and then unfortunately at the end of this interview, the recorder switched itself off again. That's why the conversation stops abruptly before I had a chance to say thanks and goodbye to AJ. And so without any further ado, here we go. Here's the rest of my chat with AJ Hoge, the magnificent AJ Hoge. Here he is. I'm sitting at a table with AJ Hoge. Okay. And I'm talking about you in the third person at this point, which I think is appropriate because you're sort of something of a celebrity online these days. I've seen you on the internet lots of times, and here you actually are. You're actually a real person. I want to know about your career as a teacher and how you started. You started in 1994. Mm-hmm. How did you first get into English language teaching?
So I started doing it basically as a way to travel, as a way to be able to live abroad, because I didn't have any money and I needed to make money while living abroad. Yeah. So I got a job in Korea as my first job, and then jumped back and forth between the United States and living in other countries. And basically I would come home, work as a social worker for a while. Then when I wanted to travel, I'd get a teaching job abroad and do that for a year or so, back and forth for a ways.
Okay. When you first started teaching in Korea, was it difficult? Did you find your first teaching job to be a challenge?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. I was teaching small children I had never taught before. I had no training. They basically threw me in the class with no warning, and I had all these little small children looking at me. They spoke no English. So it was the trial by fire, and I just had to try anything that popped into my head, and eventually, figured out some things that worked. But it was quite a tough year.
How about teaching adults? Because you moved on to do adults afterwards, didn't you? Was it a similar challenge? Did you find it to be sort of really difficult at the beginning? How was it teaching adults?
I found adults to be much easier to teach because you don't have to worry about the discipline, and they're not going to stand on the table and scream, and they're not going to run around the room. For adults, it's kind of the opposite. You need to, I find, generally to energize them to because they're tired, they're working, they're doing other things. That whereas with kids, I can be kind of hyper and energetic when I'm teaching, and it would just make the kids go crazy. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh my God, sit down, be quiet. And it was quite stressful teaching kids. With adults, I find my style works better.
Yeah, me too, because I found that I taught kids in Japan in the beginning of my career, and I found that something about my energy in the classroom just made them go wild. Like, I saw other teachers who everything was very calm and everything was very organized, and the kids were like perfectly well behaved, and I thought, this looks easy. And then I went into the classroom, and somehow it's like dogs. They say dogs can smell fear. I don't know what it is, but kids can smell something in you about your personality, and they just use it as an excuse to go completely wild. Yeah. So maybe it's something about kind of creative people or something like that, maybe. But you found adults like me much more suitable for your teaching. But did you? How would you describe your development, or what were some of the key things you realized about helping adults to learn English?
I think the key thing was that the kind of traditional way of using textbooks, focusing on abstract grammar rules and things like that, it just wasn't helping them actually speak the language at all. Yeah. And I just saw so many students failing and frustrated, and I realized I had to find a better way, a more natural and intuitive way to help them actually speak, to understand and speak and function with English. Yeah. And it took a while to figure that out with lots of experiments, but that's how my own method evolved.
Do you think that students don't need to study grammar?
So this is something that people get confused about, because sometimes I'm very strong and I say, don't study grammar rules. Yeah. And people think I mean you don't need grammar, which is not the same. It's just that grammar, I find, is best learned intuitively, indirectly, more naturally, without adding a bunch of linguistic terms and a lot of complex rules that no one can remember in the middle of an actual conversation anyway.
Right. Yeah, I agree. There's something about the way in which we describe grammar that's incredibly abstract and complicated. So if you look at the back of any course book, there'll be grammar rules or grammar guidelines or descriptions. And in order to understand those things properly, you need to already be a near native speaker of English.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got friends who, when I talk to them about grammar, I've got absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So it is a huge challenge to try and leap over all of this meta language that we used to talk about, that English or any other language. So I think one of the things that you do, I believe, is that you kind of use stories to help people understand grammar. Can you give me an example of how you might do that?
Sure. One way is, for example, teaching verb conjugations, especially the simple, most common ones, is just tell a story using different time frames. So tell the story in the present tense, then tell it again, as if it happened in the past. And of course, all the verb forms will change, and the students will learn the past tense forms of the verbs without having to remember, this is an irregular verb and this is a regular verb, and memorizing a bunch of conjugations. They just learn it naturally from the story, understanding, that the time frame has changed.
In fact, a lot of it is about context, isn't it? Because when you understand what message is trying to be communicated, suddenly that allows you to understand the way in which it's being done. That's what Stephen Krashen talks about. And I suppose that sort of supports what we do. I think we do a similar thing, to be honest, AJ. I think we've kind of got a similar approach. Do you think that works when it comes... Does that feed into the work that you do online, that idea?
Yeah, definitely. So in my courses or podcasts, whatever I do, very much, I'm trying to find ways to help students learn in a more natural way, more intuitive way, so they can actually use the language. I mean, I think that's the key thing, so they can actually function in the real world, speaking and understanding. I think too often students and teachers focus too much on academic type of English before they can even speak and have a general conversation. It's kind of backwards.
Have you ever noticed examples of English being taught in that traditional way? A way, for example, let's see, how do I say this? Have you ever noticed English being taught badly? I mean...
Sure. Yes. I think Japan is the classic story I tell is Japan, where I was an assistant teacher watching a Japanese English teacher. And the teacher wrote this sentence on the board for the students. And then for 1 hour, analyzed it and dissected it and drew diagrams. And for 1 hour, just talked in Japanese. So I had no idea what she was saying. So it's an English class. It's a beginner's class. And I'm a native speaker, and yet I understood maybe 1% of the class because it was all done in Japanese, analyzing. The students are taking pages of notes, and I just thought this is an insane way to teach English or any language.
Why do you think they do that?
I don't know. I think that it's the traditional way for some, for whatever reason, and that they don't question it. A lot of traditional teachers or schools, they just don't think about it. And maybe also because I know that sometimes teachers, maybe they're not confident, and it's easier just to follow the textbook, and then they're not doing anything different. They're not risking being criticized.
So there's a lot of psychology involved in really teaching and learning a language, I guess. You worked as a social worker for a little while at the beginning of your career. Do you feel like what you did as a social worker feeds into what you do as an English teacher?
Yeah, I think probably now, especially in my teaching, I feel like half of what I do is psychology, helping students overcome fear and nervousness and embarrassment and worry and just become more confident and more motivated and enjoy learning in the language more. So it's lots and lots and lots of that.
How do you actually do that? I mean, I always find that students always say to me, I just want to be more confident in English. And how does one actually give someone confidence?
So, kind of from my experience as a social worker, and then later just learning about other methods of counseling and coaching, there are different techniques you can use. I'll sometimes use NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, which has some nice techniques that for visualizing things in your mind, or creating peak positive levels of emotion and then connecting that to English or whatever you want to improve your performance. So there are lots of little psychological tricks and techniques you can use, and you have to practice them regularly, but to build confidence and to kind of change the emotions that you connect to English.
Right. Yeah. It's really fascinating, actually. I mean, I've looked into ways of remembering vocabulary, like mnemonics. Yeah. And the more you learn about that, the more you realize, oh my God, it's like so. It's so fascinating. Have you looked into that, for example?
Yeah, one thing I love, especially if I do live seminars or something, if we're teaching new phrases or vocabulary, is using mnemonics and also using physical actions. And I find that especially involving people's bodies, so we'll create gestures that are somehow linked to the meaning of a phrase, for example. And then I'll get them shouting the phrase and doing the gestures and maybe even imagining something in their mind. And all those things then connect the word and the meaning together, and it helps them remember it for a much longer time and to remember it faster.
Right. Do you ever encounter resistance from the people you're teaching?
The resistance tends to come more from, let's say, other English teachers, schools. I find the students, I guess I just attract the ones that like my way of teaching. They're very enthusiastic and have fun. It tends to be others in the school system that I've had problems with.
Really? Yeah. Okay, so there's like the classic kind of school traditional system that you have to kind of get through that if you want to do what you want to do. I suppose, and for me, that's why I love podcasting, because it's just like this open space where I can define exactly how I want to do it. And that actually can be a lot more effective because it just allows your creativity to run wild, and it allows you to experiment and discover new and more effective ways of doing things. What's your favorite thing? Because you do podcasts, you do videos, and you do other things. What's your favorite sort of medium at the moment?
At the moment, I'm having fun with Periscope. So this is a new live video app, which Twitter owns now. Yeah. And I'm having a great time with that because it's live and because there's a live interaction. So the audience can type in comments and questions. So sometimes I just do questions. I'll just take questions for 30 minutes. Usually I do some lesson and then questions. But I know that the students seem to love it, and I love it too. That you feel like, oh wow, it's not quite face-to-face classroom, but it's closer.
Interesting. Now, was it difficult for you to make the break from teaching in schools and working for someone else to doing it yourself and launching your own products and being an entrepreneur? Was it difficult to break away?
I would say yes and no. The difficult part was just in the beginning, right before I launched my website, was this sort of fears like no one's gonna buy anything, no one's gonna visit. But as soon as it started and I got just one person to join, my whole attitude changed, and I was just ready to do it full time. I think it was about 6 months from when I launched it to when I quit my job.
Really? Yeah. 6 months?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really promising, actually. Yeah, fantastic. Do you feel famous?
I don't know, not really. Sometimes it is fun where I'm traveling around and I meet students. They'll recognize me. That's great, actually. I love bumping into students in different countries. It's always fun to chat with them and hear their story.
Yeah. You do speaking in seminars sometimes. So this is like the broad range of English teaching, from one-to-one teaching through to classroom teaching, through to speaking to people in your audience on your podcast and stuff, and seminars where you have large audiences. What's the largest group of people you've spoken to at the same time?
3,000 in Hanoi.
Seriously?
Yeah. In fact, I'm going back this year. Yeah.
What happened? What was the event?
It was an introduction to my method. So it's an all-day event where I basically teach people a different method for learning English and studying independently. And the Vietnamese students, they are fantastic. They are super energetic, very passionate, very motivated. It fits my style. Yeah. So it's just like an all-day English language rock concert or something.
Wow, brilliant. And so you're leading sessions all day?
Yeah, it's a long day. My voice is usually dead at the end, yeah.
Right, okay. Wow, that sounds fantastic. How do people find out about your work, AJ? Because I imagine that most of my listeners are aware of you, because, if you search for learning English content on the internet, then eventually you come across something either right at the beginning of your search or later on. But for those who don't know, how do they find out about you?
Obviously, just searches on Google or whatever. Effortless English will pop up. I've got a book now, so more and more people are finding me through the book, or YouTube is a big one too. Yeah.
Okay. All right then. So here we are in San Francisco, and it's a beautiful day. Normally, it's not as hot and sunny as this. Is it a good place to live, in your opinion?
It is, yes. I enjoy San Francisco. It's got a great mix of people, very international city, and it's becoming the tech capital of maybe the world, certainly America, because Silicon Valley, which is just to the south, a lot of those tech companies are moving into San Francisco. Lots of small startups popping up, which I love that. There's a very entrepreneurial feel to the city.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that driving in here, that there are all these big posters advertising all the tech companies and different tech-related products and things like that. It is really exciting. We've here just up the road, we have Facebook, Twitter, Uber, the sort of taxi company, although they're not taxis, it's something else. Twitter, Periscope, which is part of Twitter. All right, here's a question for you. If you could launch an app, which I'm sure you've thought about, right? Imagine that you were, I don't know if this is something that you've thought of, but if you could launch an app, what would the app do? If you had like no limitations at all, what would be the ultimate English teaching app, in your opinion?
Wow, that is difficult. I think it would involve certainly the ability to connect with native speakers, but and there are already a good number of those conversation sites. But what I find the weak point of those apps or websites is that there's no underlying method or philosophy. So you never know what you're really getting from someone. So I don't know, somehow integrating lessons and videos and audiobooks, like great content that is understandable, with then live conversation partners, tutors, but trained, not just any old person. It would be a big undertaking, probably.
Like the effortless English app, I suppose.
It would be, but it would. I don't really have a desire to be the leader of some massive company or anything. I like being independent. So if I can do it in a way that would allow me to be independent and stay small, then I would do it.
Yeah, okay. But at the moment, Periscope and YouTube and so on are doing the job fine. Okay. All right. I think that's probably all we have time for. It's great. Actually, AJ, I've got one more thing I want to ask you about. And this might take probably 10 minutes or so. So I've done podcasts before about American English. Here I am in the USA, surrounded by American English. I love it, because I love to hear all the different colours and shades of the English language. But I'm curious to know what Americans think of British English. I've done podcasts about the attitude that some Brits have towards American English, and in a nutshell, some people say that American English is some sort of distortion of British English, and that it's a negative influence on British English, and that British English is under threat from the marauding influence of American pronunciation and phrasing and so on. I think most of that is just snobbishness. There may be some arguments for some of the things that people say, but most of it seems to be snobbishness. What about from the other side? What do the Americans in general think of British English?
I think most Americans find the British
Oops, what did I just do?
accent to be quite charming. There's a little feeling that, it's like the accent from the old country and things like that. So I think it's generally positive. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's nice to know. One thing I have noticed is that I'm a big Star Wars fan. You too?
I love it.
Excellent. Good. I noticed that all of the bad guys in Star Wars all have British accents. You noticed that?
I have noticed that, yes.
What's all that about? If you look at the Death Star, all of those high-ranking officers on the Death Star, they all speak with, received pronunciation.
It's that the evil empire, right? So I guess the evil British Empire, and now they have the evil space empire.
Right. I think that's it. I think that's what George Lucas was thinking. It's like, we're going to make this evil empire somehow all speak with British accents. But also, a lot of the bad guys in Hollywood movies have British accents too. I don't know what that's all about. Okay, but it's nice to know that the British accent is sort of considered to be sort of charming and... Okay, that's where the interview cuts out. I told you that my MP3 recorder just turned itself off. That's annoying, isn't it? But that was pretty much it in terms of the conversation I had with AJ. And I hope that you agree with me that was an interesting talk. It was great for me to actually meet AJ face to face, because I imagine, like most of you, I'd only ever seen him on the internet and on YouTube videos and on Periscope and things like that. So to actually see him face to face and just sit with him and actually talk to him was really a great experience. So there you go. Don't forget, you can find AJ, of course, by going to ajhoge.com or effortlessenglishclub.com, and both of those links are available on the page for this episode on my website.